Did you know that 30% of high school students went to private school? Okay, they didn't, but I'm not gonna lie, when I graduated high school, I genuinely thought this. It seems crazy to think now, but I swear it felt reasonable at the time. So I hope it doesn't show, but I went to private Catholic school from kindergarten through high school. Growing up, my whole world revolved around the things my school had to offer. All my sports teams, extracurricular activities, classes, and friends were in some way or another associated with these schools. In case you were wondering, the real percentage of private high school students in the United States each year is closer to 9%, which still seems pretty high, all things considered. As I got older and the private school bubble got farther away, the reality started dawning on me just how privileged the opportunities I had growing up were. I had college counselors that helped me prep for entrance exam tests and applications to really good colleges. The drama club I was in had a theater on campus that was better than the one at my college. And a lot of the friends I made had parents with real connections to industries that are notoriously hard to break into. Being surrounded by that level of wealth and access from an early age definitely shaped my values, ambitions, and outlooks, maybe more than I'm comfortable realizing even now. But a weird dynamic would usually show up when I started having this conversation with other people who went to these schools. I'd start to hear things like,
well, sure, we had some advantages, but it's nothing close to what you get at a real private school.
The idea of real private schools was always a little confusing to me. I feel like you don't hear that much. But just for context, in 2021, about 77% of private school students attended religious schools and 23% attended secular schools. Why does that matter? Well, most of the religious schools tended to be much lower cost than the secular counterparts. This is because parishes at a bunch of churches subsidize their tuition. In turn, the secular school boasts much higher tuition on average and uses exclusivity and extremely small class sizes as selling points. Just so you have some numbers, in 2011, the average tuition for a Catholic school was $5,800, while the secular counterpart had an average of $22,600. It's important to note that both tuition prices have raised pretty drastically in the last 15 years, but the gap still definitely exists. It always confused me. What could these ultra high-end private schools possibly be providing that my school couldn't? I never felt like I was missing out on anything in my years at private school, yet there was a school down the road that cost 4 times as much. This got me thinking, what exactly is it that private schools provide? Because it feels like it's a lot more than meets the eye. Private schools in the US have been around for a long time. A very long time. Longer than the United States. Roxbury Latin was the first. It was founded in Massachusetts in 1666 with the goal to educate the sons of rich Puritans. Not just to make them smart, but to make sure the right people, the people who already had the money and power, kept passing that down to their kids. And this wasn't some outlier. Schools like Phillips Exeter, Andover, and Groton, all elite prep schools that still exist to this day, were built on the same idea. That education isn't just about learning, it's about maintaining a social order. But let's fast forward a couple hundred years. The US industrializes, public education expands, but private schools don't go anywhere. Instead, they evolve. You start getting these prestigious prep schools, modeled after British institutions like Eton and Harrow. They're explicitly designed to funnel kids into Ivy League schools. If you went to one of these places, your path was basically set. You went to Harvard or Yale, you went into Wall Street or politics, and that was the formula. But after World War II, something shifts. The American middle class explodes, suburbanization takes off, and suddenly private schools aren't just for the top 1%. Catholic schools in particular take advantage of this by subsidizing tuition through the parish. And private education starts marketing itself as a better alternative to public schools, especially in big cities where public schools were struggling to get proper funding. This is when private schools started opening their doors to the middle class, not just the ultra-rich. However, as you may have noticed, when we get to the end of the century towards the 2000s, wealth disparity has begun to increase again. This new growing elite leads to the rise of ultra-elite private schools, with tuition rivaling that of top universities. Smaller private secular schools that once charged a few $1,000s a year began raising their tuition dramatically, pushing all but the wealthiest families out. By the 2000s and 2010s, we see tuition surpassing $50,000 per year at some of these places. The most well-known of these ultra-elite private schools near me growing up was a small high school in Studio City called Harvard-Westlake. Tuition here is over $50,000 a year. Its alumni network is full of successful politicians, famous actors, and even a former governor. It gained the school a reputation as the place to send your kid if you wanted to get into an Ivy League. In fact, the school made news a couple years ago when it came out that several parents employed the work of Rick Singer, who, in case you didn't know, was the orchestrator of the college admissions scandal a few years back. The message was clear. If you lived in Los Angeles and you had the money and you wanted to send your kid to a top school, you sent them to Harvard-Westlake. Now this brings up the question, what are private schools actually selling? When asked this question, these schools often tout smaller class sizes, rigorous curricula, and high college admissions rates. Now, it's true that private school students on average score higher standardized tests and are more likely to attend selective colleges than public school students. However, research suggests most of the academic edge comes from other factors, like their family alumni status and incomes, rather than the school itself. When comparing similar students, the academic advantage of private schooling shrinks substantially. In fact, a study from Brookings concludes that private education offers little or no measurable boost in test scores or learning gains once the student demographics are accounted for. The same findings are applied to college acceptance rates. 95% of students from top private high schools attend college, as opposed to 65% of public school students. But again, studies show much of the disparity comes from the backgrounds of the students, not as an impact from the institution of private schools. If your parents went to college, you are much more likely to go to college. Okay, so if these schools don't have a distinct impact on test scores and college admittance, what value do they have and why do they keep getting more expensive? There is some evidence that suggests after similar college education, private high school alumni still enjoyed faster career progression with quicker promotions and access to high status fields, which indicates something else is at play. There is an implicit promise at these schools that is not talked about very often. If your child is surrounded by other kids from wealthy backgrounds, they're very likely to form a network of friends full of future executives, politicians, and industry leaders. This is sometimes referred to as an old boy network over in the UK where this all started. These relationships formed in high school can lead to advantages in getting internships and opening up doors to jobs that other people would have no way of knowing about when starting out in the job market. This is the reason these schools are getting so expensive so quickly, as the implicit understanding of this benefit makes its way through circles of parents that can afford it, and wealth disparity reaches alarming new highs in the country. There's more of an incentive than ever to insulate your kids from the possibility of even having to compete with everybody else. These kids aren't applying to hundreds of jobs on LinkedIn out of college. They have internships set up at their friend's parents' company. Okay. I'm trying out a new angle. So we've already covered that these high-end private schools bring in a ton of money. When you're charging $50,000 a year per student, and on top of that you've got alumni donations, endowments, and fundraising events where parents are writing six-figure checks, these schools start operating less like schools and more like businesses. Some of the biggest ones like Harvard-Westlake, Phillips Exeter, and Andover have endowments in the hundreds of millions, some even over $1 billion, which is the kind of money small colleges operate on. They have dedicated fundraising teams that actively reach out to rich alumni and parents for more money. That's not something you see in public school. Sure, there might be a PTA selling cookie dough, but at Harvard-Westlake you've got gala events and auctions. I actually worked one of these auctions at my old high school a few years back, and I wrote down some of the prizes. VIP tickets for the Eras Tour, a signed guitar by the members of KISS, a designer dog that sold for over $4,000, a private meal with a White House chef, and a house in the Bahamas. Meanwhile, public schools rely on government funding, which is usually tied to property taxes. So if you live in a rich neighborhood, your public schools are probably fine. But in lower income areas, schools are often underfunded, overcrowded, and struggling just to keep programs running. One of the wildest things about elite private schools is how much their administrators get paid. The head of Phillips Exeter makes over $600,000 a year. Compare that to a high school principal who's still making good money, but we're looking at closer to $120,000 to $180,000, depending on the district. So private school headmasters are getting paid, but teachers? It's a different story. Public school teachers can actually make more, especially in a well-funded district where they're unionized. Some public school teachers with tenure make over $100,000, while private school teachers, even at elite schools, often make between $50,000 to maybe $90,000 on the upper end. So why do they take the relative pay cut? Well, private school teachers usually have smaller class sizes and fewer standardized testing requirements, but to be real, the main reason many take it is because of heavily discounted tuition for their kids. So as we now know, one of the biggest differences between private and public schools is staffing. Private schools have positions that just don't exist at public schools because they don't have the money to fund them. They have dedicated college counselors, fundraising staffs, and even marketing teams to help shape their brand. Some have alumni relations officers whose whole job is keeping former students engaged and donating. Public schools spend most of their budget on salaries, facilities, and state-mandated programs, while private schools invest in expanding campuses, hiring more specialized staff, and offering high-end amenities. My high school, for example, is currently working on an expansion of their athletic center that will cost tens of millions of dollars. When private schools bring in this much money, the line between education and business gets blurry. Okay, all right. So at this point, you may be wondering if there's any way to level out the playing field. And you'll be happy to know there's a few solutions floating around with varying levels of success. The first of these ideas are called school vouchers. These voucher programs take public education funds and allow families to use them towards private school tuition, which in theory makes private school an option for more students. It sounds like a great idea to level out the playing field, right? Right? The main argument for vouchers is that they can give low-income families more of a choice. If a public school isn't meeting their needs, they can take the voucher and enroll their child in a private school instead. But there's complications. Most vouchers don't cover the full cost of private tuition. In states like Arizona, where vouchers are widely available, private school tuition can still exceed the voucher amount by thousands of dollars. It means families who are already relatively well off are the ones who benefit most, since they can use a voucher as a discount, while truly low-income families are often still priced out. Even when families can afford the difference though, there's no guarantee they'll be accepted. Many private schools have selective admissions, meaning they can reject students based on academic performance, behavior, or even just fit. Public schools, on the other hand, are required to take every student. So rather than creating equal access, vouchers can end up subsidizing students who are already in private schools, while leaving public schools with fewer resources and fewer students. Let's go back to Arizona. Their universal voucher program is one of the largest in the country, and it's also one of the biggest cautionary tales. When the state removed income limits on eligibility, the program exploded in cost. Originally projected to cost $65 million, it ballooned to over $332 million in the first year, and is now on track to reach $429 million. The result? A massive $1.4 billion budget shortfall, and this forced cuts to higher education, infrastructure, and other public services. What's worse is that reports show that 82% of students using the vouchers were already in private school before the expansion, which means the program wasn't even serving the students it was designed to help. Instead, it became a subsidy for families who were already paying private tuition. The financial strain of voucher programs doesn't just affect state budgets, it also weakens public schools. When students leave for the private schools, the funding tied to them leaves as well, but public schools still have fixed costs. The buildings are still there, you still have to pay teachers' salaries, and you still have to pay for transportation for students. So losing students without a proportional decrease in expenses leads to budget cuts, teacher layoffs, and fewer resources for the students who remain. If the goal is to provide high-quality education for everyone, school vouchers might not be the answer. But there is a Scandinavian country that offers an entirely different approach, one that eliminates the financial barriers between public and private education altogether. In Finland, private schools exist, but they can't charge tuition for mainstream education. They receive public funding just like public schools, which means access isn't determined by a family's ability to pay. Because of this, nearly all students, regardless of socioeconomic background, attend schools with similar resources and opportunities. This model obviously stands in pretty stark contrast to what we have here, where, as we already discussed, education quality often depends on your zip code or your family's income. In Finland, teachers are well paid and highly trained. The curriculum decisions are made with students' well-being in mind, and competition between schools is minimized. The results speak for themselves. Finnish students consistently rank among the best in the world in literacy, math, and science, despite having less time in school and having less standardized testing than their American counterparts. Now, adopting this approach might sound like a radical shift, but so did universal public education once. The real question isn't whether we should expand school choice, it's whether we should redefine what choice actually means. At the end of the day, private schools aren't just about education, they're about access. Whether it's smaller class sizes, professional theater facilities, or $4,000 designing dogs, the most valuable things these institutions offer isn't necessarily what happens in the classroom, but who you're surrounded by. The true advantage of private schools, especially at the highest levels, is the network they create. It's not about whether private school students are inherently smarter or more qualified than their public school counterparts. It's that they start life with connections and opportunities that others simply don't have. And as the gap between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else continues to grow, these schools have only become more exclusive, more expensive, and more embedded in the cycle of wealth. They aren't just selling education, they're selling social mobility insurance, ensuring the next generation of elite stays exactly where they are. So back to the question we had at the start, is private school worth it? For those who can afford it, the answer is often yes, but that leaves the rest of us with a much bigger question. What do we do about a system where access to opportunity is so heavily gated? Some argue school vouchers are the answers, that if more students can afford private school, the playing field will level out. But the way vouchers have played out in places like Arizona shows they often do more to subsidize those already in private schools than create real access. Meanwhile, countries like Finland have taken a different approach. They ensure all students, regardless of income, attend well-funded schools with equal resources. And to be honest, that's where I find myself reflecting on my own experience. I didn't go to one of these ultra elite schools, but I still went to private school and benefited from a system that prioritizes exclusivity. I had resources that made my path easier, even in ways I didn't fully appreciate at the time. And for a while, I struggled with that realization. It's easy to feel conflicted when you recognize that your opportunities came, at least in part, from a system that leaves a lot of people behind. We're all shaped by the circumstances we're born into, the influences around us, and the paths made available to us. There's no version of me that grew up outside of influence. It would have just been a different set of influences. Because the real problem isn't that private schools exist, it's that they've become a necessity to those who can afford them, while public schools are often left underfunded and struggling. The idea that success should depend on where you went to high school or who your parents know is exactly what a functioning education system should be working against. But as long as the wealthiest families can buy their kids into better opportunities, that gap will keep growing. If the goal is true equal opportunity, the solution isn't just making it easier for a handful of students to join an elite club. It's making sure that club isn't the only place where success is possible in the first place.